It was a bright afternoon in Gaza, the kind of day when the heat presses gently against your skin and even the smallest breeze feels like relief. Children's laughter drifted through the alleys as families tried to carve out moments of normalcy amid months of shelling and power cuts. At the Holy Family Catholic Church, a small crowd huddled under patched canvas tents in the courtyard, seeking shade and safety. There were mothers with babies in their arms, elderly men with canes, and children with disabilities who could barely stand without support. They had fled their homes after yet another airstrike flattened entire blocks of apartment buildings, not because they were Christian, but because this church had become one of the few places in Gaza where aid workers still delivered food, clean water, and medical care. No one expected what happened next. Without warning, a deafening blast shattered the calm. A shell tore through the sky and slammed into the church compound, tearing open the canvas tents and sending shrapnel ripping through the crowd. In an instant, the lush courtyard turned into a scene of horror. A young custodian lay bleeding by the steps, a frail octogenarian collapsed among torn blankets, and the parish priest, Father Gabriel Romanelli, clutched his side as he staggered toward the broken doors. Dust and debris filled the air, and survivors dove for cover, pressing trembling bodies against the cool stone walls. "They came here for protection," whispered one witness, her voice cracking. "We thought this place was a haven. How wrong we were." By sundown, 3 people were dead and at least 10 more wounded, their cries echoing through the corridors of Al-Ali Hospital just a few blocks away. Doctors scrambled to treat deep shrapnel wounds and fractured limbs as the lights flickered and the generator threatened to cut out. The head nurse, her face streaked with tears and sweat, described rushing to save children who had only known life under siege, their world reduced to rubble and bloodstains. Caritas Jerusalem's tents, which just hours earlier had offered a moment of reprieve, lay twisted and torn, testaments to how even prayer and charity cannot escape the destruction of war. When news of the strike spread, the Israeli military issued a rare apology, calling the church shelling unintended and promising a full investigation. It was the kind of statement heard by many Gaza residents before, words meant to soothe international outrage but unlikely to comfort the families of the dead. Israel's foreign ministry posted on social media, "We deeply regret damage to civilian structures, including religious sites, and express sorrow for any loss of life." In Gaza, however, such apologies ring hollow. The hospital director pointed out that the church compound lies in a quiet residential area with no known militant presence, and witnesses insisted no rockets had been fired from the tents. "This was no accident," said one volunteer who helped carry the wounded. "They targeted a place filled with women, children, and the elderly." In Rome, the new Pope, Leo XIV, issued a heartfelt plea for an immediate ceasefire and sent a telegram of condolences to the parish of the Holy Family Church. He spoke of profound sadness at the loss of innocent lives and called on all sides to embrace dialogue and reconciliation. His words carried weight because they echoed those of his predecessor, Pope Francis, who had spoken almost daily with Father Romanelli during the 21-month war. Francis had listened to reports of shortages and shelling, offering prayers and moral support to a man trapped in one of the most dangerous corners of the world. In his last messages before his death in April, the late Pope had urged world leaders to spare civilians and protect places of worship. Yet here, in Gaza's battered heart, those prayers seemed to go unanswered. The attack on Holy Family Church was more than a breaking news headline. It was a stark reminder of how no place in Gaza has been safe. Hospitals, schools, UN warehouses, and refugee camps have all come under fire, leaving hundreds of thousands of civilians with nowhere to turn. The Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem, whose church was hit in a previous strike, condemned the shelling as a grave violation of religious sanctity. In statements dripping with moral outrage, church leaders described the attack as an affront to human dignity and the Geneva Conventions, which require the protection of civilian infrastructure during conflict. They called on international bodies to hold responsible parties to account, yet little beyond condemnations has materialized. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni was among the few world leaders to publicly reprimand Israel. She summoned the Israeli ambassador in Rome and demanded answers, branding the strike on a civilian church unacceptable. In her view, religious sites are not battlegrounds but sanctuaries where the innocent should find refuge. Her demand for sanctions and a transparent probe reflected growing frustration in Europe, where many governments have watched the Gaza conflict with mounting concern over civilian suffering. Even in Washington, normally a steadfast ally of Israel, there were murmurs of unease as aid convoys were shelled and precious relief supplies destroyed. Back in Gaza, the Christian community, already dwindled to barely 1,000 souls, recoiled in shock. Many had considered emigrating long ago, but deep bonds to their ancestral homes and the church building itself had kept them rooted. Now those roots shook in the ground. 4 families sheltering at Holy Family Church. The hours after the shelling were spent in frantic search for loved ones under mangled metal frames. Children wept for their injured friends, and volunteers crossed themselves, murmuring prayers to keep panic at bay. In a cruel twist, faith, the one thing meant to sustain hope, felt as vulnerable as any tent canvas. The church's janitor, a gentle man who had served hot tea and bread to thousands, died clutching a rosary in his blooded hands. The elderly woman receiving care in a Caritas tent had insisted on sharing her food ration with neighbors, even as she trembled from arthritis. Father Romanelli, his traditional black cassock torn and stained, was praised for refusing to leave until every person was accounted for. His calm commands guided survivors to safety, yet his own wounds, shrapnel cuts and a sprained ankle, reminded him that no leader is immune to the chaos they strive to quell. As dusk turned to night, the church courtyard glowed with lanterns and cell phone lights. Aid workers laid mats on the dusty ground, offering morphine and bandages. An impromptu procession of candles formed a circle around the rubble, a silent vigil for those who would not see tomorrow. Local musicians played soft hymns, their chords echoing against the broken walls. And throughout Gaza City, news of the church strike spread through word of mouth, social media posts, and text messages, carried by people desperate to make the world see what was happening beyond the headlines. This was not an isolated event. East of the church, 2 schools sheltering displaced families were hit by a separate strike, killing 1 person and wounding 17. The Ulburi refugee camp echoed with cries of grief as parents rushed to hospitals with their wounded children. In every strike zone, the same pattern emerged: chaos, confusion, and then the cold calculus of who would receive treatment and who would be left to wait for days under rubble. Gaza's health ministry, run by medical professionals but overseen by the Hamas government, recorded over 58,000 deaths since October 2023, making Gaza's civilian death toll among the highest in modern conflicts. Israel, in turn, has lost dozens of soldiers and civilians to cross-border rocket fire and tunnel incursions, insisting its actions are justified to protect its own people. But for the families huddled at Holy Family Church, such arguments offer little comfort. Behind the scenes, ceasefire talks sputtered along in Cairo and Doha, mediated by Egypt and Qatar. Negotiators exchanged proposals on security corridors, prisoner exchanges, and the easing of the siege, yet each session ended with little more than temporary pauses in violence. Israel demanded guarantees against Hamas rearming, while Hamas insisted on a full withdrawal and the opening of Gaza's crossings. Neither side wanted to give ground, and civilians continued to pay the price. The attack on a church, once considered off-limits by both sides, suggested the rules of engagement were rapidly unraveling. For Father Romanelli, the shelling has become a personal testament to the church's mission. In interviews from his recovery room, he spoke of feeling the bombs strike beneath the ground, as if war itself had crawled into the earth to hunt him. Yet he emerged determined not to abandon Gaza's smallest community, despite offers to relocate abroad. "If I leave," he said softly, "who will stand with those who have nowhere else to go?" His words resonated with many Gazans who see the church not just as a place of worship, but as a beacon of solidarity amid sectarian divides. Christians and Muslims alike have sheltered together in the compound, sharing food and prayers, forging bonds that war otherwise tries to sever. International aid agencies have appealed for funds to rebuild the church compound, replace destroyed tents, and restock medical supplies. Caritas Jerusalem pledged psychological support for survivors, recognizing that trauma runs deeper than physical wounds. Rebuilding walls and roofs will take months, but repairing hearts demands years of counseling and moments of peace, both painfully scarce in Gaza. Still, the outpouring of global solidarity, from small parishes in Europe sending prayer chains to grassroots donors on social media funding generators, has reminded Gazans that they are not forgotten. Outside Gaza, the strike on Holy Family Church has fueled renewed debates over international law and the laws of war. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International condemned the attack as a potential war crime, calling for independent investigations into both Israeli and Hamas forces. The United Nations Security Council met in emergency session, its members trading accusations and veto threats. In Geneva, lawyers argued over the principle of proportionality, whether the military advantage gained justifies civilian casualties, while ethicists decried the moral erosion when places of worship become fair game. Yet amid the legal wrangling, the church courtyard remained scarred. Steel tent poles lay twisted like fallen crosses, and the scent of diesel from backup generators mingled with the acrid residue of explosives. At night, the flicker of candles cast long shadows on crumbling walls, as survivors whispered the names of lost neighbors. And somewhere beyond the chain-link fence, the hum of drones patrolled the skies, a constant reminder that safety is always just out of reach in this land. Still, hope persists in Gaza's smallest church. Each morning, worshippers gather under makeshift awnings, their voices rising in songs of praise and pleas for peace. Father Romanelli, cane in hand, leads prayers that call on God to turn swords into plowshares and shields into windows of understanding. Children chase each other through the rubble, their laughter a fragile but powerful defiance against despair. Aid workers distribute bread and water, reminding families that even in war, acts of kindness can shine brightest. And so, the story of the Holy Family Church strike is not merely one of tragedy, but also of resilience. It shows how human lives can be shattered in an instant yet find ways to piece themselves back together. It reveals how faith and solidarity can bloom even amid devastation. It reminds us that in Gaza, where every building, every street corner, and every shelter carries the scars of conflict, people continue to seek refuge not only from bombs but from the fear that tomorrow might bring even more loss. If you want to keep hearing these stories, to learn about the lives behind the headlines, and to bear witness to both suffering and courage in places too often forgotten, please subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. Share this video with friends and family so they too can understand the human faces beneath the rubble. In a world where news moves at the speed of light but empathy sometimes lags behind, your support helps ensure that voices from Gaza reach every corner of the globe, and that the hope found in places like Holy Family Church is never extinguished.